Okay, this video is from the book John Mcdougall, The Doctor Who Fought for You by me, Pete Rogers. This is right here. This chapter is the chapter on FAQ, Frequently Asked Questions, Chapter 17. Starting out with Dr. Mcdougall's newsletter from January 2006 on aging and style. Okay, Dr. Mcdougall says, the longest lived person ever of authentic record was a French woman who lived to be 122 years of age. There's about 80,000 living centenarians, people 100 years of age or older, and almost all of them never saw a doctor before 90 years of age. So that's an important point. They achieved their longevity without going to the doctor. So it's obvious that medical intervention did not play a role in their longevity. The average lifespan of an American in 2002 was 77 years. In 2002 for Japan, it was 82 years. So the Japanese were living 5 years longer. Of all the Adventists, it was 85. Okay, so the Adventists were living longer than the Japanese, including the Okinawans. The vegetarian Adventists were living an average of 87 years of age. So that's a long, long life. They've got the longest lives at that time that were accurately measured. Caloric restriction has proven a method that will increase longevity in mammals. By switching from meat, dairy, processed foods, and oils to a starch-based diet, vegan diet, a person typically eats about 400 to 800 fewer calories per day. So in a sense, you're just calorie restricting just by going vegan. This spontaneously happens because the starches have a low caloric density and are very satisfying to the appetite. Okay, and then also, this is sort of my own aside, that protein restriction also appears to increase longevity, and you can go from protein restriction to just restricting a single essential amino acid, like methionine or something, and it appears in animal studies that that can create longevity, and that would be a lot easier for a person to do than would be caloric restriction. Okay, well, you get mild caloric restriction switching from animal foods to plant foods, but you can get even bigger effect with the other things I just mentioned. Okay, Dr. Mcdougall continues. Another benefit of the plant-based diet is that it is high in antioxidants. Antioxidants are health-promoting when it comes from plants. When isolated and put into supplements, antioxidant chemicals are not helpful, and they actually increase the risk of sickness and death. Yeah, that's another common, this is my aside here, a common aside about supplements. You have to be real careful with them, because in the body you'll have A plus B plus C equals E for excellent, okay? And you're like, I want to get more of E for excellent. But then you take, tons and tons of the extra thing, like tons and tons of, let's just say, for some B vitamin. And now, instead of generating E for excellent, you start running a side pathway, which is harmful. So whenever people are given, these high-dose supplements that they don't need, there's no deficiency, there's nothing being corrected, there's no reason for them, they tend to have worse outcomes. So one has to be careful about that. Let's see, animal foods, cow's milk, soy protein, like in burgers, protein bars, candy bars, other synthetic foods, cause increased ILGF, insulin-like growth factor 1, and this may increase aging and the risk of cancer. So that's a big thing that the excessive protein does. You not only activate mTOR, you also increase insulin-like growth factor, which is, related to mTOR too, but it's more of that stimulating more cell replication. Okay, so part of what led to his motivation to write that newsletter was a paper by Gary Fraser. He's a pretty well-known researcher on the Seventh-day Adventists, and it was called 10 Years of Life, Is It a Matter of Choice? The Seventh-day Adventists, especially the vegan Seventh-day Adventists, lived much longer than other Californians, okay? Another newsletter from Mcdougall, just the title of it, The Food Industry Buys Nutrition Research. Yeah, we all know that. That's why anything that's industry funded usually tends to be essentially worthless, because they're not going to fund something, they're not going to publish it unless it promotes their product, whatever it might be. Okay, the athletic performance of the Tarahumara in northern Mexico, the Kenyans in Kenya, and the Ethiopians provide undeniable evidence that the healthiest diets for human beings are very high in carbohydrates. Yeah, the Tarahumara can run over 100 miles in 2 days. It's like every guy in town, not just one runner guy. The Tarahumara average total cholesterol was 125 milligrams per deciliter. Their average triglyceride was 120. They were eating lots of corn and local greens and some local squash. Everything was organic, it's local in Mexico. Okay, now this is Better Moods from Vegetarian Diet, this newsletter. Okay, vegetarian diets are associated with healthy moods. Okay, one researcher, Betty Bezold, wrote that the vegetarian diet profile does not appear to adversely affect mood despite low intake of omega-3 fatty acids. Vegetarians reported significantly less negative emotions than omnivores. So I've actually written a lot about this sort of thing. Basically, you go to eat processed food, there's a lot of stimulants. There's often caffeine, it's a stimulant. There's often lots of glutamate in there. Manufacturer-free glutamate, monosodium glutamate, those are stimulants, okay? Simultaneously, there'll be mold inhibitors. Those are mitochondrial inhibitors. There might be aspartame. That's also has a stimulant effect. Increases activity of the NMDA receptor for glutamate, allowing calcium into the cell. So they're all bad, and they also will tend to have sodium, a vasoconstrictor. So you can see what you're doing to the brain. High fat drops blood supply oxygen delivery to the brain. High sodium drops oxygen delivery to the brain. Simultaneously given with neuron stimulators like glutamate, caffeine, aspartame, all those things ramp up the metabolic rate while you're dropping the oxygen and glucose delivery. That's bad. And then you throw in the mold inhibitors to inhibit the mitochondria, and you've got a real screw job. The cell can't make as much energy as it wants. Those things can damage the cell. Our body's designed to eat things that our ancestors ate, hundreds, thousands of years ago. It's not designed for all these modern, fake, factory-produced foods. Okay, now a newsletter about the World War I rationing in Denmark. During World War I, the British naval blockade caused 400,000 Germans to die from 1914 to 1918, where they continued to eat diets heavy in meat. Denmark, which was also under the blockade, even though it was neutral during the conflict, but they did much better. This was due to their nutritionist physician, Mcdougall, and here's what he figured out. He figured out that what they needed to do was switch from a diet of meat to one where the bulk of calories came from starchy grains and vegetables. When they started feeding them these grains, the population became much healthier. During the years of food rationing in Denmark, the population had a decrease in death rate from disease by 34%, despite the fact they were stressed out, being under a blockade. Similar reductions in disease and mortality were seen in World War I and World War II and other populations from, for example, diabetes. Okay, a bunch of articles here, a bunch of newsletters, just to mention them to you. Cured meat hurts the lung. Cured meat's also a well-known carcinogen. CT scans that are looking for cancer may cause cancer. You're just radiating the chest. Low-fat vegan diet, you got lower incidence of cancer. Like if you look at Papua New Guinea, they smoke like chimneys, but they had a relatively low incidence of lung cancer, 6 times lower than USA. And it's thought that's because the USA ate the high-fat diet, making the tissue ischemia from that. You superimpose that on the hypoxia due to the smoking, and you've got a lot of hypoxia, which can create a Warburg effect and increase cancer risk. Sleep apnea, too fat to breathe. Yeah, sleep apnea is super common. I see it all the time. Vitamin D pills are of little or no benefit and some harm. What to do now? Yeah, so Dr. Mcdougall, he's not a big fan of prescribing vitamin D. He goes into all his reasons for that. Okay, then when he talks about all the arguments about different diets, he felt that all the plant-based diet doctors should get along with each other and should help to teach the public the benefits of eating plants. But, they sequester themselves. It's like I can tell you, all the high-fat phonies, they won't interview me, and that's before I call them high-fat phonies, because they're really preaching a different diet, and they're pretending it's the healthiest diet. It's not. Let's see. Proponents of meat and dairy-based diet cause sickness, and the profits are reaped by the pharmaceutical companies, the medical doctors, the hospitals, the beef and the dairy industry, and the insurance companies. Okay, Dr. Mcdougall's next newsletter. People cannot survive more than a few days without water. Hydration helps prevent kidney stones. Hydration seems to reduce the incidence of headaches. It also improves skin tone. Better to drink bottled water from a glass container than from plastic. Yeah, if you're just drinking tap water, then you're drinking a lot of stuff you don't want. The chlorine, the F-, and a whole bunch of estrogenics. Okay, Dr. Mcdougall newsletter from 2008, December. The ancient human diet is starch-based. So they found starch grains on the teeth of people from early Peru, like 11,200 years ago. And they also felt that these indicated that some of them, these grains were cooked. And the reason he's going through all this is to show that people have been eating starch diets for a real long time. He thinks since the beginning of man's existence on the planet. Oh, okay. Now here is the story of what happened when he was in Hawaii working on the sugarcane plantations. with the different groups of men. And the Filipino men, when they're ready for retirement at like 65 years of age, they would go back to the Philippines and get a bride, a woman in her 20s, okay? And they would have a whole new set of whole new family. And there was no Viagra in those days. These Filipino guys eating their, low-fat, plant-based diets, they were healthy and sexually potent into their 70s. And they would routinely have another family, live into their late 80s or 90s. And so that's an inspiration to all men. Whereas the incidence impotence is very high with the standard American diet and high-fat diets. Another thing a lot of people don't know about is H2 blockers, acid blockers in the gut. They will significantly increase the risk for cognitive impairment. One has to be pretty careful with all that stuff. So anyways, that's it for today. I hope that was helpful.